of the fiscal year, which we did expect because the kind of that last quarter, people were working from home. The expenditures weren't being spent in the offices. So some people were like, I want to, try to, I have things I need to get done or I wanted to do, so I'm going to encumber some funds, and that was totally fine. But we did have some turnbacks, so we did get about $730,000 of turnback money that went back to the general fund. Part of that was under public safety, and that was just when I was looking at the numbers, those were just more like vacation time, sick time. Those budgets were actually, people at the end there during COVID time, people weren't taking any vacation, sick, personal. They were at the stations and working in police and fire. So there were some line items where their vacation line items, their sick, personal, PTO, those things didn't get used, so they are actually coming back to the town. So we really did well there. Turning back, that actually helped, again, kind of helping in our bottom line for free cash. This is just another look at some of the budget line items. Under the free cash, when I closed for the free cash calculation, when I closed everything out on our balance sheet, our undesignated fund balance was $2.9 million. How the calculation of free cash is, they basically then take your open receivables for personal property and real estate. They subtract that out of your undesignated fund balance. It's basically money that is still to be collected, so it is designated. So that's why the Department of Revenue will take that out. They actually will hit you with any little deficits you have. I had about $4,000 of small little deficits that are on the books. And then they add back what we call deferred revenue, where you're saying you're deferring it for collection. So that is really the calculation for free cash. And they certified, the Department of Revenue has certified our free cash as for $1,721,550. The pieces of what actually the sources of free cash, it kind of was, like I spoke of, we had turnbacks from the departments. We had the FinCom reserve turnback. We had some prior encumbrance turnback. That state assessment, I apologize, that really should be down in the surplus revenue line item and not up in expenditures. I put that in the wrong line, but we had so the state, we had a little extra of, we got extra Chapter 70 funds that came in, and I'm sorry, but the assessment, the school assessment, also there was a little bit of extra money there, so that was supposed to be done. That's supposed to be the revenues piece. And then we had revenue, our local receipts came in over what we had budgeted by the 425. So that really makes up all of the pieces of our additions for free cash. I want to just speak of how we ended the year for our enterprise funds. Our sewer enterprise fund, undesignated fund balance or their free cash was certified as $419,378. That, as you can see, we had started the beginning balance of their undesignated fund balance was that 1.5 million. And the reason why it went down so low, it was due to the main break that we had down at Southwell. So if people remember, we voted at town meeting that we would use that undesignated fund balance for that break, for the fix. And that was in the 700 range to fix that. So that money kind of got drawn down from their undesignated fund balance. So now they have a lower amount than what they had last year. So that's the certification there. This is just basically where our sewer revenues came in. From actuals, from budget to actual. So they just had a small little increase of about almost $17,000 of revenues than what we budgeted for. And this is their expenditures. And there's that over expenditure. So you can see that we had, what we basically do in the enterprise is we go ahead and spend, and then I close out the balance to the undesignated fund balance. So that deficit of that $737,000, that was the majority of that, and almost all of it, is the cost of what it costs down at Southwell to fix that break. Stormwater enterprise, they had their free cash certified at $158,730. This account, or this fund, is a year and a half old. So it's just starting out. We've actually just kind of had our first year of collections. We had our first year of liens to the stormwater, to the user fees, any liens over to tax. So this account is just coming up. As you can see, we have a lien add to tax for only $4,000. They're small dollar amounts, but they did certify that their revenue over expenditures, they basically had a positive amount of $158,730, and that's what the free cash got certified as. And just going through, this is their revenue and then their expenditures. Looking at this account, because it's a new account, they're really not generating the revenue in this account like they would be a sewer or anything like that. The next enterprise we have is a golf course enterprise. They have a undesignated, or their free cash was certified as $114,458.25. We did have, we did spend some money over there, and I'll show you this is their expenditures over their revenues. And that was another warrant article that was at town meeting, because they went and did a couple of the greens. They were, that money was coming from their undesignated fund balance to fix those greens, or their free cash to fix some of the greens over there. And the second to the last is we have the PEG Access Enterprise Fund. They had theirs certified to $282,925. Again, they had, this is their revenue over expenditures. They actually took in, their revenue came in higher than what they spent. So that just added over to their free cash amount. And then at their town meeting, they just recently they're gonna be using some of them. They're gonna be using $20,000 of that free cash to do some projects. That was just voted at the spring town meeting.
Excuse me, Darlene.
Yep.
When you say the Stormwater Enterprise Fund is new, so it's not generating revenue yet,
So
how long does that typically take before it becomes more self-sustaining?
So it takes, what I saw with the sewer, it takes like a 2-year cycle. And the reason why I say that is because what happens is we collect the user fees. The user fees that we don't collect, we lien to tax. Then that takes, it doesn't, when they go to lien to tax and they go over to the tax collection office, those actually don't get collected until then almost 6 months to a year later. It's just the delay of how they get lien to tax, and then they're on the next year's tax bill for collection. So it's going to take at least 2 years to 2.5, because we were in this, we started this fund halfway through 1 year, and then this was our full year. We're just not getting the whole circle of life with the account, and we're just not getting them, all the collections we're seeing coming in. So really, we did get the user fee for the 1 year. We haven't got the lien money yet, and then we're going to be leaning again in December. I will be getting a list of an amount that's got to be leaned again for the collections. It didn't get collected for this fiscal year. So by 22, I'd say that's when we're going to just see that it's going to be like money coming in on both ends, the user fee and on the liens. Right now, we're just not seeing that full revenue coming in yet.
Thank you.
And then the last, Nope, I guess that's it. That was on, is there any more questions on 20 and how we ended the year? We did very well considering how we, really that last kind of quarter was, but the revenues were still coming. Basically, we had collected most of the revenues by that time. It was just the smaller, the meals and the hotel tax. For fiscal 21, where we're at right now, this is actually through August. Again, like I spoke about our motor vehicle, what we did I shouldn't say about it, when the town manager and the finance director got together to set the budget, they did reduce the line item for motor vehicle by $500,000. And that was probably a smart thing to do because we are going to see a decline in collections in this line item. So the strange thing about it is we saw about a 23% increase at this point from the same time last year. But we received a commitment in September that was 23% less than the commitment we received last October. So it's kind of weird that it's the same number. I saw a 23% increase right in the August timeframe from last year, but this commitment that we just received in September is actually 23% less than we received last year. So I think it's going to even out. I think we're really still going to see a decline in this line item. Permit fees. We're about 1% from collection from last year, so that's staying about the same. We've collected $314,000 to date. And like I spoke about meals tax, at this point, we've had nothing received to us. No meal tax or rooms tax is zero. And that's just due to the state, the tax relief for restaurants and lodging. And I just don't know when if we'll see that money. Our revenue collections are though within our benchmark of like it's only 2 months in, but it's 16% of our collections and we're right in that. And here's a shot. We're actually like 15.2. So we're pretty much into that benchmark for the collections. I don't see any other than the meals tax and hotel tax. I don't see any major issues in any of the collections. It's still early in the year. And then the same thing with our expenditures. At this point, all the departments should be within the 16% range. The only line item that of course goes over is our benefits. And that's because on July 1st, we basically send out all those big bills right off that we pay everything out right away. So that's just, we do that to get the discount fees on those also too. But everybody's department's right in where they should be. I don't see any issues. I've spoken to department heads. No one's having any financial issues in their departments. And if anybody has any questions, that's just about, that's a wrap up for me before we get into the school budgetary stuff. Any questions? Okay. Up to the school.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Yeah, very briefly tonight, no formal presentation from the school side. Quickly to end up fiscal 20, we ended in good shape, made all of our necessary journal entries and adjustments at the end of the year. I'm pleased with where all of our revolving and grant funds ended. I have no concerns over fiscal 20 funds at all. And then, as you know, we made some budgeted adjustments to fiscal 21, and we're just ending the first quarter of fiscal 21 at this point. But you know, we don't have any concerns budget-wise at this point either. So this is early in the fiscal year for us. We actually just had our first payroll in the school department for all of our school year staff week before last. We have our second coming up this week. So we're still making some adjustments to payroll and encumbrances and whatnot. But budgetarily, we'll be doing our first quarter review sometime at the end of October. But we're not flagging any issues at this point at all. We're managing a couple of extra COVID CARES Act grants at the school department, similar to the town, with regard to utilizing some of those funds to pay for PPE and different building preparedness activities that we had to before the start of school. We did begin school in person last week. Thursday was the first day that we had kids back in the buildings. And all in all, it really went pretty well. We had some minor difficulties, a couple of technology drops here and there with regard to Google is the platform that we use. I think every school district is now kind of bombarding Google in their classroom setup. So a few little drops here and there, but really the opening of school went off remarkably smoothly. So we were very happy about that. We welcomed in our second cohort of kids. Kids are coming to the district 2 days in person and then staying home 3. So we had the second group of kids come in today, and again, another very smooth day. Buildings are making little logistical changes to pick up, drop off and things like that, like they would at the beginning of any school year. But I'm really actually very pleased with how things went overall. Staff are working really hard to put a good program together for the kids and families this year. But really no financial issues on the school department at all, no requests at this time. Closed 20 well, 21 is off to a good start. Again, just managing those couple of COVID grants and obviously from the school side, support later on in the agenda, the addition of a couple of capital projects that we weren't able to move forward with last spring because of the unknown. We'd certainly like to move forward with them this fall in October if possible.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lang. So with that, we'll move to John. I think you're next up on the agenda. We're going to hear from the Finance Director, John Souza, about our capital request for fall town meeting, fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26, capital planning for the Middlesex County Retirement System, actuarial evaluations, and future assessments for Chelmsford.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to all of the chairs and members of the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee. If I could just, would it be okay if if we put the presentation back up? Let's see.
John, do we have you? Let me just see if we have yours. Do you want to put yours up, or Darlene, can you put?
I can do that if you'd like. One moment.
We don't. I can't do a screen share to you unless Pete does it.
Okay.
There you go. Your co-host now.
Okay. One moment. There we go.
Thanks, Pete.
Oh, I'm okay. I'm going to try to bring it up on my computer here, Pete. Let's see. Pete, are you able to? I do have it up for some reason. I just can't, it won't, I just can't seem to get back to.
Pete, do you want it? There you go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
We can.
All right, let's just, Pete, if we could go to slide 32. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
There you go.
So when we last got together at town meeting, I know there was some concern by some of the members that the capital plan for fiscal year 21 had been sharply reduced. At that time, when we were trying to plan the FY 21 revised budget, we didn't have a lot of visibility with state revenues, and we didn't really know how town revenues and state revenues would be impacted by the pandemic. And we had made a commitment at that time that when we went into the fall and came back to fall town meeting, that if finances allowed, we would make every effort to try to restore some of the high priority projects. And just to go through them with you, there are two that involve public works, which are road improvements, which is paving and repairs to pavement, as well as sidewalk construction and repairs. The third one would be turnout gear for the fire department. And then two important projects that involve the Chelmsford Public Schools. The first is the renovation of the Parker School kitchen. And then also the renovation of the McCarthy School auditorium. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at these in a little more detail. For public works, sidewalk construction and road improvement, a lot of concern because, as we know in New England, all of the roads, many roads which are based on the pavement management engineering survey, need repaving and repairs, every single year just to try to keep pace with, the effects of weather. And so this was something that we wanted to make every effort to try to fund. If we can go to the next slide. Turnout gear, which is the personal protective equipment that firefighters wear when responding to calls for service. This includes helmets, gloves, coats, pants, things that you like in the photograph. And in the past, the fire chief has made every effort to apply for grant funding when it's available, but there has not been any grant funding available. And the personal protective equipment is something that it does wear out, it does get damaged on certain calls. So this is something that, for their safety, it has to be updated. And we need to provide at least 2 sets per firefighter. If we go to the next slide, you may recall this from past capital planning meetings and discussion at town meeting. Our facilities director and DPW director, working in cooperation with school administration, found that with the way school is structured right now, although students have come back for some in-person instruction, meals are not being served due to COVID-related concerns and the school modified school schedule. So this is actually an ideal time to. This allows us to go in and totally revamp this kitchen, and it can be done basically all in one shot, if you will, rather than trying to do certain phases at certain times. And our public works director and cooperation with school administration was able to identify some cost efficiencies and savings because of this being all done at one time. In addition to, you may recall, we had some limited funding at the past town meeting for code compliance issues. So this project has decreased over $260,000. If we go to the next slide, this is another important project. As many as you know, the McCarthy Middle School dates back to the late 1950s. And although repairs have been done when needed over the years, this is really the first total comprehensive renovation of this facility that's ever been done. And unfortunately, it's one of those things, the price tag increases over time. But again, we think this is an opportune time, with the bidding climate and interest rates. The cost to totally renovate this facility is $740,000. It has increased slightly since the last time we looked at this, about $70,000 or so. But this, in the lower left portion of this slide, you'll see that the scope of the work is broken out so you can see what are some of the components that are driving this cost. And you can see that the biggest cost components are really totally revamping the lighting system. That's just over 300,000. Installing a new audio-visual system. And then the seating needs to be totally replaced, as well as flooring, painting. There's some rigging that needs to be done, as well as construction of a sound booth. And there's some contingency money built into this project. So this would be a total renovation of this facility. And then if we go to the next slide, you see that this is just to summarize that when we left town meeting back in June, the amount of projects that had been authorized were just over 1.47 million. These requests that I just described total 1.978 million. So that gives us a total capital budget for the current fiscal year of 3,453,073. One of the things that we'll be looking at on the next slide is that when we take this into account, we have our capital budget for the current fiscal year. The 3,453,000 would be financed through 5 and 10-year bonds, depending on the life of the project. And then also there's another there will be a proposal at the fall town meeting next month for the renovation of the North Chelmsford Fire Station. And the estimated cost of that improvement is about 3.4 million. What I wanted to do is to do a debt projection summary, because one of the questions folks may have is, you understand the capital needs that we have in the town, but you can see when you have 3.4 million for capital plus 3.4 million for the fire station, questions may come up of, how can this be afforded and how will this fit in with our debt schedule? So one of the assumptions I made when we look at the capital improvement program is that we're going to continue to have an annual capital budget each year of about 3.6 to 3.8 million going forward. So when we go to the next slide, just to explain this, when you look at this, the column on the left that's called outstanding, that includes all of the bonds that are currently outstanding in our non-excluded debt service budget. And there's a number built in there that we're going to continue to keep funding our capital improvement program through bonds going forward. So that's just, you can see the numbers. Just to give you some perspective, for the fiscal year that we just finished, fiscal year 20, our non-excluded debt service was about 7.5 million. It was projected to be just about 7,061,000 based on the fact that we were initially going to borrow a very small amount for capital projects. And then we assumed in 22 that we would continue in all the successive years. After going back and looking at increasing the FY21 capital budget, as well as adding on the cost of the renovation of the North Fire Station, I've incorporated those numbers into the column you see that says projected. And so you can see that one of the things, if the capital and the North Fire Station is approved next month at town meeting, we will need to go back and just amend the debt service budget and increase it about 396,000 for this year. And then I've also shown a debt service projection so you can see how these projects will fit in. One of the things that works in the town's favor is when you look in that first column outstanding, you see that even before we begin to talk about these new capital projects, the town's non-excluded debt service was declining each year. And that works in our favor because as we add these projects in, the good news is that although we'll be increasing the debt service budget for the current fiscal year, you can see that even after adding in the capital plan that I just described for fiscal year 21 with the additional projects and the North Fire Station, our projected debt service for fiscal year 22 will still decrease to around 6.9 million. And then it holds pretty steady, just a very small increase in fiscal year 23 at 6.9 million. And then it continues to slowly decline in the years ahead. So it worked out that we were able to, time time the borrowings and the start of these projects so that they fit in well with our existing debt service schedule. If we go to the next slide, I know many of you folks have seen this slide before. This is the, just shows the date, the age of many of our buildings on the municipal side and also the public schools. Just a reminder that a lot of our facilities are continuing to age and will need investment dollars in the years ahead. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to take a moment to discuss capital planning for fiscal year 22 to 26. We always say, you know, when you do capital planning, it's important to not just look at the current fiscal year, but we always have a 5-year plan. So as we look at the needs ahead, if we go to the next slide, slide 42, these are totals of all of the projects that are already in the capital funding pipeline, if you will. So when we begin holding our capital planning committee meetings late this year, these are projects that have already been submitted by departments, and they may include projects that were deferred in the past, but you can see that for the next 4 fiscal years, it totals just under 19 million. We will be sending departments a request soon it's that time of year. They will be due in late November. We'll be asking all departments to re-examine all of these requests for projects that they've previously submitted, to update them, give us update costs, and also look at the priority need level, as well as to submit new projects for fiscal year 26. So when you look at this number, then just under 19 million, excuse me, it's important to note that that does not include any projects for 26. Those projects will be turned in, as I said, in late November, and then the capital planning committee will start to review those and hold meetings in this coming December. If we go to the next slide, and then the next one after that, we'll switch gears for a moment and move away from capital planning. And I just wanted to bring up on a different matter that the Middlesex County Retirement System recently had their actuarial update report performed. They have a professional actuarial consultant that does this every 2 years. And just to give everyone an update on how things are going with Middlesex, you'll see that the liability system-wide, or excuse me, not system, for the town of Chelmsford increased by just over 10.7 million from the last valuation. I'll describe the reasons for that and then discuss why this is important for us. So the key changes on this actuarial valuation report is that Middlesex Retirement's commissioners voted to reduce the assumed rate of return for the retirement system as a whole from 7.5 to 7.3%. And they also voted to extend the funding schedule 2 years later out to, it was previously scheduled to be funded fully by 2035. And that's really scheduled out to now, just extended 2 years to 2037. The actuarial, or excuse me, the market value rates of return that were earned during calendar year 2018 was for 2018 was a negative 2.25, and then for 2019, that calendar year, it was actually a good return, 15.4. The reason it was negative in 2018 is, I know for a lot of folks the years blend together. If you recall, way back in December of 2018. The capital markets took a really steep tumble, and the S&P 500 lost like 9% that year. So unfortunately, right before this valuation was done, I mean, obviously things have definitely come back, but at that moment in time, that was a steep decline. So that was the reason that return was negative that year. If we go to the next slide, one of the reasons why this is important to the town about the valuations, and that is that these determine our Middlesex retirement assessments. So this is the charge that the town pays for all town and school employees. This does not include our teachers because they're included in a completely different retirement system. But you'll see that if you look down at the bottom inside the box that says payment due July 1st, the actuarial valuation that was just performed tells us that for the next fiscal year, we can expect our Middlesex charge to increase about $371,000 to $9.88 million. And then the following year, we can expect our Middlesex assessment to increase about $655,000 to $10.53 million. To put those numbers in perspective, I know they're large increases, but if you look at the FY22 increase, that's about just under a 4% increase. We fared a little better than this fiscal year when we experienced a 7.2% increase. When we get to fiscal year 23, that's about a 6.6 increase. Middlesex's guidance to us is that going forward, we should plan for about a 6.6% increase per year. So we fared somewhat better in fiscal year 22. And it's just something, every town, the percentages vary. It really depends on the makeup of the town. So they can vary from that average that they use for all of the system. So just wonder, as we look at it, when we start to look at crafting the budget for fiscal year 22 and the next year, it's just important to keep this in mind, that this is a large increase that we'll have to just keep in the back of our minds that we'll have to budget for. So that concludes my remarks on Middlesex. If there's any questions on anything, I'd be glad to answer it.
John, I do have a quick question. When you talk about the debt service, 10-year projections and the non-excluded debt and so forth, is there a standard that you use? Is it 5% of the annual budget that you kind of target as our debt service, or is it whatever we need? Just curious.
Generally, we try to keep it. Our financials policies have differed over the years, but we generally try to keep it somewhere under. We've always tried to keep it somewhere around either about 5%. Sometimes it's traditionally been around 7.5, sometimes 7.6 million in that area. That's really, we've tried to include more projects in that over the years, and generally we try not to exceed that because that's really the maximum of really what's been affordable in the town operating budget.
Okay. I'm just wondering what the max years to go to where rates are just so low right now and money's like almost free. I'm just wondering what the limit you'd go to on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Ken, is we definitely have a lot of capital needs out there. We try to keep it affordable because the non-excluded portion means that we have to pay for the debt service within our tax levy. If we had a very large, like a school project that was say $100 million or something, because we cannot fit those payments within the tax levy, then we'd have to go to the voters and seek a debt exclusion. But up to now, we've been able to sequence the projects, whether it's been the center fire station and the large ESCO project that benefited the schools and the town government. We've been kind of able to sequence those and fit them within the non-excluded debt service area of the budget.
Yep. Thank you, John.
Hey, John, what are the bond rates right now that we're getting in terms of loans?
It varies on the term that we would borrow. It can be as low as like around 2% for 10 years, probably like 2.5 to 2.7 when we go up from there. The 20-year, we don't do a lot of 20-year borrowing, but it varies, I would say 3 to 3.5, somewhere around there. So it's going to vary. It's going to go up slightly the longer we borrow, but most of our borrowing we do around for 5 or 10 years.
right. Anybody else have any questions for John? There's nothing in the chat. I don't see anybody. So thanks again, John. Great job.
Thank you.
So Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I've got a number of items to talk about, and thanks for putting the screen up, Pete. I want to talk about, sort of where we've been over the last 4 months, where we're going, what are things looking like for state aid, touch briefly on stormwater assessment, briefly on the fiscal 22 budget process, looking at property bill tax trends, and fall meeting warrant articles. So as you may recall, we last had a tri-board meeting 4 months ago in May, and then we were at town meeting 3 months ago in June. And we were sort of in the height of the pandemic in terms of the fiscal situation, in terms of the shutdown was still in severe condition. The relief from Washington was sort of still being ironed out and so forth. And honestly, and if you've read some of the accounts in recent weeks, things have turned out better than anybody, I think, envisioned, including the information that I was reading earlier today. If you may recall, when we were here 4 months ago and at town meeting 3 months ago, the state had sort of gone on a short 1 month budget. They pushed their budget out to the end of July. It was a 1 month budget. I think everyone sort of figured they'd wrap up the session, complete the budget, and go on like a regular year. And instead, the state took a further pause and said, no, we're going to adopt a further interim budget to the end of October. And then in August, as we know, the state sort of said, well, we've got to start giving some answers to municipal officials because they're going into their town tax setting season, and we have to have some guidance. And so basically the news turned better for us. Basically what happened was the legislative leadership and the governor came out and promised municipal governments that we would receive level funded Chapter 70 educational aid and level funded unrestricted general government aid, a lottery, even though at the time the state was still estimating a $5 billion deficit in what's really a $40 billion state budget, and there was still no relief known from Washington. I think what's happened is the state is now, as we're in mid-September, they've gotten state revenues in for July and August, and they actually came in much better than they had forecast in what generally happens in a recession period. And the reason for that was what's unlike any other recessionary period that the town, most notably the severe recession of 2008, 2009, here there's an unprecedented level of federal and state support for people who are out of work. And you heard the stories about the stimulus funds and how many people were actually earning more money from stimulus relief than what was they were earning at their lower paying jobs. And then sadly, the displacement of jobs in this economic crisis has really been at the lower wage levels, which doesn't impact as much the state income tax levels. And so the state is now looking to see how their first quarterly state preliminary income tax payments will come in, and we'll have that data by October. The other thing that the state sort of is finding is quite curious is, much like we saw from private insurers, the health insurance cost in services sought by people really diminished significantly because people were concerned about their health risk of going towards medical facilities during the COVID crisis. And so where medical care and Medicaid is at 40% of the state's budget, they think they're going to absorb some savings there. So, and there's still some hope by the states that somehow, some way at the end, there will be some federal relief from Washington that will provide support for states and municipal governments. So the bottom line is, and you can see it on slide 41, we have a commitment by the state for level funded of our two main local aid accounts. And it's slide 47. And on September 10th, the state gave the other part of the equation saying, well, what are your estimated state assessments? As Darlene noted in her report, sometimes your state assessments don't come in as forecast. And that has to do basically with the major state assessments are charter school tuitions, school choice, and then there's miscellaneous other charges such as mosquito control districts and MBTA and other assessments and so forth. So on September 10th, just about 10 days or so ago, they released numbers on that. So we basically updated our spreadsheet. And if you go to the next slide on page 48, plugging in the state numbers from what the budget was in 20 to what we now have as a revised numbers for 21, we're basically almost within 1%, which was, and the next slide I'll show you, but it was saying on this slide, so you can see the blank columns of change in chapter 78 are now 0. And then the unrestricted aid, about four rows from the bottom, is now 0. As you can see, of the 17 million, they're basically 16.5, 6 million of it. So basically your two main accounts are level funded. So if you go to the next slide on page 49, so you can see where we were from the budget versus spring annual town meeting estimate versus where we are now. And the key one is that second row, state aid. The budget was 17.4 for the year we just finished on June 30th. At the time of spring annual town meeting, we were reducing that by over $3 million down to 13.966 million. Now, using the level aid commitment from the state, you can see that number bounces up by $3.3 million. So that's the key number, 3.3 million. So what that ends up doing is we're not making any recommending, and at this point there'll be no action on the fiscal year 21 operating budget. So what that does is that creates excess levy capacity because your revenue sources are now up by $3.3 million for the community. We still have the same balanced budget that we left in June with at Springtown meeting. So that's why the first row, called property tax, you can see what we envisioned at the levy limit of 100 of going up from 106 million to 109.5 million, now only goes up to 1.66 million. So now basically it means is we're 2.95 million under levy, which basically means is what's going to happen now is this unforeseen level funded of state aid is going to provide result in a very small increase in the tax burden to the community under the property tax, based on everything else holding constant, which is what we're doing. Why those numbers don't exactly align are twofold. You can see the number is 367,000. One factor is there is some slight change from the state assessments versus what was known at the time at the town meeting, but the bulk of that number is the debt service. So that John spoke about earlier, that if we're going in there and funding the roads, the sidewalks, the fire turnout gear over a 5-year period, and then 10 years for the Parker School kitchen and the McCarthy Auditorium, we're going to make a debt service payment in the end of this fiscal year. So that's the variance. But like I said, even accounting for that variance, you're seeing a significant amount of basically reduction in what otherwise would have been the tax levy. And later on, I'll get into what this really means in terms of dollar and cents for the typical voter. So we then go on to the next slide. Just want to touch quickly on stormwater. Darlene mentioned it earlier. We just finished our first full fiscal year of stormwater. And we basically sit down, as you can imagine, when the books close, Darlene submits a balance sheet. We sit down and look at the cash balances, the free cash designations, and also our projections for the year ahead. And it's sitting down with Public Works and looking at the budget that was adopted in June and how revenues are trending. We quickly determined two things. One is that the sewer revenue fee, which hasn't increased in a half dozen years, that likely is going to have to increase in fiscal year 22. We've sort of come to the end of the road with that, just in terms of how revenues are trending as the budget increases annually due to higher wage schedules and so forth. But on the newer and the nascent stormwater surcharge, our calculations are that based upon actual experience now, and not the forecast models, that we need to adjust the fee schedule from $20 every 6 months to $24 of that surcharge to meet the approved operating budget. So again, we're not making any additional expenditures beyond what was approved back in June. But looking at the revenue trends, that's a change. And then similarly on the non-residential, is that same 20% increase will go across the board. So the good news for property taxpayers, whether commercial or residential, you're not going to see a significant tax burden increase, all things being equal. However, you will see this slight adjustment in stormwater surcharge, which by no means is any way comparable to what one would pay in property tax. So just wanted to get that out, because those new bill adjustments will take place beginning in January. And so we just wanted to get the word out as we're here this evening. So now just wanted to move on and touch upon the budgetary schedule. If you go to the next slide on page 53, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the state hasn't completed its budget process. Their budget, temporary interim budget, is supposed to be expires at the end of October. And so normally by now, John would be preparing, and the next week he'd be issuing budget forms to department heads on the general government side and capital forms. It just seemed in our collective wisdom in terms of, that the best thing to do at this point is let's delay it all possible for two reasons. One is let's see how things are in this murky world going forward in terms of what the state actually does for a full budget. And also, let's see how this uncertain economic situation continues month to month, week to week. And basically, we're trying to put it off as long as we can, but be reasonable. So towards that end, basically, we're going to issue capital requests at the end of October. So basically, 6 weeks from now, we'll send the requests out to departments. And as John said, those will be due, late November, so the capital planning committee can meet on the first 3 Fridays in December and complete their effort. Then on the operating budget side for the general government, we're going to submit submittals on November 30th. So again, the requests will go out at the end of following town meeting at the end of October. They'll have a month to turn their budgets in at the end of November, and that'll leave ample time for John and me to compile all this information after he gets the capital stuff compiled and the capital committee meets through December. And then the idea would be is we would reconvene the tri-board meeting in 4 months at the second Monday in January. And basically at that point, we'd see where we are. A lot of things will have changed. Again, they'll have 6 months of actual experience in terms of what's happened with this fiscal year. An election will have passed, which may have some bearing in terms of what the future is in terms of aid to the community at the federal and state level. There'll also be perhaps some clarity on the coronavirus in terms of what the course of that's going to run. Again, just more information if possible. However, we'll still meet the budgetary release requirements in the town charter, which is, as town manager, I'd release the budget by the last Monday in January, which is basically 90 days prior to the scheduled town meeting in April. So that would stay firm. So basically, we're holding off as long as we can in order to allow as much information and situations to unfold, so that we can have a realistic planning process. And obviously, the school department on their side, I imagine they'll go with their traditional budget planning and needs process. Again, giving them some time to see how things have settled in with the remote learning. And where we might be, come, December and so forth. The good news is for fiscal 22, we have most of our collective bargaining agreements in effect for that final additional year. So that part of the equation will be known. Those can be plugged in, even today, assuming the same staff were in place, the same positions. So basically, I imagine the school committee would sort of begin on a typical trend, and then therefore, we would have that discussion in January, and then what would happen is the finance committee would begin their process in February after the release of my budget to then meet with the departments and also meet with the school department and the Neshoba Tech, along the February-March timeframe, so they can get their budget, produced and released. Again, hoping and on a schedule that would be a traditional town meeting date at the end of April. So that's the schedule. So again, we're we're delaying, but not delaying the actual release of the budget, just delaying the submission of that. Coming back to more important and more contemporary issues in terms of the next slide of the property tax bill trends and outlook. If you go to the following slide, I just want to take a moment to sort of just look at the trends. And we see this chart every year when we do our tri-board meetings and budgetary planning process. The 20 data is complete. This all comes from the Department of Revenue website. You can see we rank 68th. One would be the highest average single family bill. So we're staying around that 68, 70 level as we traditionally have as a community. Obviously, the other thing to show from this chart is the value of properties continues to increase on average single family properties. This past year was 447, 553. No surprise if you're following the real estate market that, again, values go up January 1st, 2020. So there will be an increase, and you can imagine January 1st of 2022, when we're starting the 22 budget, that number will go up as well. So again, that trend we estimate will continue. But more importantly, if you look at the average single family tax bill increase, this year it was up $361 from 19 to 20. And you can just see that the trend over the years is the bill tends to go up. Why it didn't go up in 19, obviously that was the year the bill was split. So you saw a decrease in taxes. But aside from the classification issue, you can see the tax bill goes up a couple $100 at a minimum each year. From 17 to 18, it's over $250. Again, 16 to 17, it's up significantly. Again, go through each year. If you now go to the next slide, and this working with Frank Green in the assessor's office and John and so forth, as I mentioned earlier, it appears that our tax levy limit as a result of the unforeseen level funding of state aid will be 2.9 million under our property tax levy limit under Proposition 2.5. So this year, which is sort of the economic fallout from the coronavirus, at least the first year of that, the preliminary estimates suggest that the average single family tax bill increase will be only about $50 to $100, which is significantly less than, again, the increase that we've seen this past year and what we've seen and what we tend to see over time. So again, I think that's good news in terms of, and at a timely news in terms of what's going on with the economic situation around us. And again, the trends that seem to be coming back in terms of unemployment levels and so forth. But again, there's still a ways to go, particularly if we go into the winter situation. And the big fear in everybody's mind is there another shutdown? And if that's the case, then it could be a real interesting scenario going forward. If you go to the next slide, the other thing that influences. Yes.
Could I ask a quick question
ahead.
about that?
Yes.
Not taxing to the limit, the levy limit.
Yes.
How does that fall? What happens next year? How does that? What's the progression of that? So we don't tax to the levy limit this year by a significant amount.
Yeah. Well, the good news is it's not lost. So basically, now think what's happened here. We're $2.9 million under the levy limit. But also, if you remember back in June, we applied $2 million from our stabilization fund. So if you net that out, basically we're giving tax relief for this fiscal year, but we haven't impacted our future taxing authority and ability under Proposition 2.5. So, and also we're not overspending relative to the budget, because what you'd hate to do is cut your spending to the point that it's not sustainable, and then you're forced to then bounce up with an increase. So in other words, if we're 2 million under the 2.9 million under the levy limit, and we're 2 million with stabilization, if we're at a case where we can no longer utilize the stabilization, because as we know, we can't draw that fund down perpetually, because we saw what happened in the community in the mid 2000s when that occurred. What ends up happening is when that's no longer available, then obviously you're going to have to make up for that $2 million of stabilization fund that's not there, but you're still able to maintain your services in the community without making budgetary cuts. So basically, just to give an order of magnitude, every $1 million of taxation is about $70 for the average single family bill. So that's sort of what it means in context. So what it does is it allows us to provide temporary tax relief during the economic fallout of the pandemic, and I think probably relief next fiscal year as well. But then as you get a recovery, then you no longer provide that relief, but yet your budget is still sort of, staying at the level of services that we have as a community going forward. So it's worked out so far to be a stable financing schedule. And one thing that even John mentioned in his situation, what you want to do in your capital planning and in your operating budget and in your property taxing, is you want stability, because meaning stable increases or stable funding, because if you go deviate from that, what you're going to have is you're going to have spikes. And that's what we're trying to avoid is the situation where, it'd be like if you had a savings account and you had a rough patch, and let's say that rough patch was going to last 2 or 3 years, but you use all that savings account in the first year, then your second year or so, or your third year, if it's a 3-year crisis, you're going to be squeezed because you basically didn't sort of smooth or provide those revenue relief from your savings account over that multi-year period. So that's how I envision it taking place at this point in time. Again, a benefit that we didn't see from the fact that the state now has level funded. And why is that important going forward? Well, history has shown us, and I know history hasn't always been a good guide with this economic calamity that we're in now, but history has shown us is that once the economic crisis passes the political stage, that I'll call, meaning the immediate assistance from the state and the feds, the government recovery tends to lag, and therefore your economic recovery tends to lag as well. So that's a polite way of saying is everybody's anxious at the front, and you saw this even in the federal and state government this year. The crisis hits, they jump on board with the stimulus funding and so forth. Now you don't feel as much support in the crisis, and this is sort of the political standoff in terms of what's going on with the election and so forth. But once you pass the election, again, none of us know how the election is going to turn out, but trends have shown us in the past is once that issue is passed and people sort of move on to newer issues and other activities, the government level of recovery tends to lag. So what I'm saying is this sort of sets us up for the ability to sustain the community in terms of the level of services and taxation if we go to what we hope are the latter stages of what could be a 2 to 3 year revenue dip as a result of this, the fallout from the coronavirus. So again, that's, we sort of got an unforeseen boost from this state aid commitment. And also the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that the economic fallout hasn't been as bad. The only thing that could disrupt this, as I mentioned a short bit ago, would be if things turn, real dire, and then all bets are off for everybody. But this is a good place. And again, what we didn't do is, aside from meeting the unforeseen capital needs that as John showed you, are always growing, we're not reopening the operating budget. So we're not coming in asking to restore anything. We're just basically saying, let's keep it as is. The fact that the windfall is there from the state is fine. We're just going to basically, pass it into the revenue stream, reduce the tax levy, and move forward. And one point in that, and say, well, why didn't you do that with capital? Let me explain. One is the capital needs, as John described, are significant in this community, and let me explain why. You may have noticed John's number was very big for example, for fiscal year 22, because items were deferred. And let me mention what a couple of those deferred items and big items are coming up. On the schedule for fiscal 22, which again, we'd be discussing in December and bringing next April, is a fire apparatus. And as we all know, fire trucks now go from $800,000 to $1 million. We should be addressing the basketball courts and tennis courts at the high school. And that's a 7-figure number. Much like the significant cost that we saw going in for the high school parking lots, to address the high school basketball and tennis courts is well over $1 million. So those are big numbers. And not to mention the other items that you have, such as technology and facilities and so forth. And honestly, had we not hit this economic pandemic, I would have looked towards, had things been normal as they've been the last couple of years, I would have looked towards the free cash this year to probably have addressed the high school basketball and tennis court situation with the free cash. That obviously is just not in the cards right now. And also, I need to hear the input from the school committee, because when the school committee looks at their facilities, you know, much like we talked about with the parking lot, the first thing that doesn't come to mind is, well, we got to address the basketball courts and the tennis courts. Even though they were in a situation where they were so unplayable that they almost canceled the CYB, basketball program in the summer and so forth. And Gary's telling me he's probably going to put $50,000 in if there even were to be a program this coming summer of 21, which we don't know about. That's the condition they were in. And you remember how bad the high school parking lot was as well. So again, we need to have the input from the school committee in terms of their priorities. But those are the types of items that are on capital going forward that push their number up, as well as all the numbers up, because the buildings age, the technology needs continue to grow. But I guess in perspective, it's a lot cheaper than building a new building. And I think one of the things, and not to pat ourselves in the back, but we ought to take pride in the fact that unlike some other communities, we were able to open our school facilities timely. You know, it was a great effort by everyone, from the superintendent to the facilities people, from Gary Perschetti, Kathleen Canavan, Brian Curley, Jay Lang, everyone else. We were able to open on time with technology, in suitable conditions, because of the investments we've made over the last decade and so, and even in more recent years, in terms of the HVAC systems and so forth, in the modular classrooms, and things are in good working order. And again, you can see us coming in and wanting to do the Parker School cafeteria, not because, gee, isn't that a nice thing to do? But when we sit down with the Board of Health and the superintendent and facilities, they say, look, this really needs to be done now, because we really don't want to be opening this facility that's serving students, if we had to. And that was why we sought the interim funds for code relief in June. But now we really want to address the whole situation. So again, that's what's going on here with the situation. So I know it's a very long-winded answer to your question, Kathy, but I'm just trying to give you a perspective of our perspective in terms of why are we doing this at this time, and bringing these choices to the community at town meeting next month.
Well, I appreciate that, and it was very interesting, and also applause to everybody who made the school thing happen. Thank you.
Okay, if we want to go on to the next, yes.
Sorry, I gotta add on to that conversation. So we have the excess capacity this year in the $2.9 million, and that levy capacity obviously doesn't go away. It exists. It's there. Do you anticipate having to use that capacity plus increased capacity in the coming years?
I think eventually, yes. And let me explain. That was one of the reasons why I wanted John to show you the Middlesex actuarial assessment. Because again, if nothing changes, let's say the fiscal year ends on June 30th, 2021. If we do nothing, we know that we've got to pay Middlesex that extra money, going forward. We also know, as I mentioned earlier, we've got contractual obligations for the final year of the contracts going forward as well. So that's going to eat a big portion of it. I think, and again, we'll discuss this more, particularly as we get to the end of the calendar year and to the January tri-board meeting. My sense is we're looking at level service budgets for fiscal and level staffing for fiscal 21 into 22. But even aside from that, the other thing we talked about, and again, you'll see at the end of the slides in this presentation, our trash contract is going up, not because, of anything other than the market forces there, and the fact that we are generating more trash because the changes from the coronavirus. So there's hundreds of thousands of dollars there. So what ends up happening is you're in your what we call your level of increase without a change in service levels going forward, just because of the cost of government operations in terms of what we provide as a service organization. We pay people. to teach. We pay people to public safety. We pay people for, to provide voting services and so forth. That's what we do. And therefore that's our big component. So I think between that and the fixed increases from the retirement assessment, healthcare will be an interesting question going forward, is what will the rates be for fiscal 22? That's a big driver. This year we got sort of, again, an unexpected windfall because of the fact that people stopped seeing medical care. At what point does that resume once the virus ends? Where is there a catch up in terms of the fact that the elective, quote unquote, elective surgeries, does that not start to resume in terms of, we're seeing that now. Does that, once the virus, sort of is sort of seen as you either hit herd mentality or you've got the vaccine and so forth, do things sort of slide back to normal in terms of healthcare? And is there a catch up there? Because those are the big drivers, benefits and payroll. And so that's why I'm saying we'll come in and give you the numbers of what it takes to, meet those obligations going forward.
So essentially, we'll have a savings about 210 to 250 per tax bill this year, if all things stay the same. But there could be an increase, a bump in future years.
Yeah, probably 23. Because what I'm recommending at town meeting is take the free cash that we just received, put it back, put it into the stabilization fund, so that we can provide another $2 million in relief for fiscal year 22. So basically, we were given 2 years of $2 million relief, and then that still leaves the town's reserves at the appropriate healthy level by our governmental policies. So we provided relief during the crisis, and then as you move out of the crisis, then yes, that goes away. And also the other thing is the free cash probably won't generate as much going forward because you've squeezed the budget. The issues that Darlene spoke about in terms of turnbacks, for example, if we've now reduced our snow and ice budget by a third, $500,000, you're not going to get that windfall going forward. Again, and you can just see how things are tighter, and with the revenue fluctuations, you may not have that. I mean, one thing that Darlene's budget showed is we collected $1 million less in local receipts in fiscal 20 than we did in 19, where Darlene said that was the peak year. So when you went from, you can see, and what happened with motor vehicle is not that people aren't driving, but what ended up happening is because of the concerns with public transportation, people were buying cars, but basically it hit the used car market, not the new car market. And coming up, we'll show you a slide of why that matters.
Okay.
So yes, that's what we see. So
there are plans to address that potential increase going forward, but there will be an increase off of this year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So hopefully you're saying you have a same level of increase for fiscal 22 going forward, 50 to 100. Now, again, what makes this tough is if you go to the next slide, it's what happens to the valuations themselves. And what we've seen over time, and we've discussed this, we know at many of these meetings, is the shift from residential and commercial valuation. You can see that shift going each year has gone the wrong way. Okay, and again, you can see we're 5 years ago, we're at an 80-20 roughly, or 81-19. We're now at 83-17, 80, around there. Go to the next slide. Based on the valuations as of January 1, 2020, the Chief Assessor Frank Green's telling us that we're going to see a continued projected change in residential that's going to be 2.5 times that of commercial, and certainly much more than industrial. And we're also in the midst of a reval year. And soon you'll be getting notice of the new valuations. They'll be holding hearings, and then all this will get wrapped up in the next several weeks. But the bottom line is you're going to see that shift continue. And these numbers, remember, are on January 1st, 2020. Now, we all know what's happened in the last 9 months. Residential values, the market is hot. Residential values are appreciating. And now the commercial market is suffering in terms of vacancies and a diminishment of value perhaps, because what is the market for commercial and industrial going forward in terms of, are some of these changes as a result of the remote workplace and so forth from COVID doing, to that situation in terms of valuations of buildings. And so I think that's probably going to hit us in 22 because that'll be the values as of January 1, 2021. Basically, the value is 3 months from now. So that's another reason why I want to be able to provide that $2 million of stabilization fund relief for fiscal 22, because it's going to be needed there. But in order to provide that relief, you got to have adequate reserves and the in this case, the fund source coming in.
Oh.
So that's the situation on valuations. Real quickly, as we move to the next slide in terms of the fall town meeting warrant articles, I'll just touch upon a few things that are in our minds as we were preparing the warrant and doing the financial planning. If you go to the next slide, I just want to take a moment in terms of the free cash history. Again, the bottom number, Darlene told you earlier tonight, 1.72 million. Sounds like a big number, but we're running a $138 million budget. So when you talk about the percentage of budget, it's only 1.25% of the budget, which is not a big number. I mean, if we're running 138 million, if you were to pay that equally over 12 months, you don't have, it's not a huge turnback. And you can see historically, it's not a huge turnback as well. And it was even less than what we had in 20. So that gives you the context. If you go to the following slide in terms of stabilization fund, and there shows you sort of the plan that I was describing. Here we are in 21. This is the one that's boxed. You can see we're transferring out that it was 2 million plus we had some miscellaneous stuff. So 2.22 million. The proposal is to transfer in the free cash, the 1370, into that budget. Obviously, those funds earn interest. So the goal would be we'd finish the year around just under $11 million. And then you can see in fiscal 22, same idea, put in $2 million. Let's again take, hopefully free cash number comes in, best case scenario, 1.3 million. We're now down to, the budget's still growing. We're now down to about 7.5% of the budget. And then you can see, then it goes away. And then you just get, your normal, it transfers out and transfers in going forward in that market. So that's sort of the overall plan in terms of the stabilization fund. And again, if you've got an $11 million budget and you're talking 138 or 140 and so forth, you basically got 1 month of operations in reserves. And that's by no means excessive when you look at, typical funding levels by municipal entities. And the last slide I wanted to touch upon was motor vehicle excise. Again, Darlene touched upon it real quick, was we think we peaked in 2019 when we hit 5.6 million. You saw in 20, we were down to 5.3, which basically brings us back, funding levels back below even the 2017 number. And why that matters and why that is if you go to the next slide, John talked about this, and Darlene, you can see the billing commitments thus far. And again, these are interim bills and not a big amount in terms of the aggregate. The big one comes in January for people who've owned cars from the previous year. You can see that the commitments are down, again, as you would expect during this economic challenge. And why it matters is, if you go to the final slide on motor vehicle excise, that's the depreciation schedule. And you can see the steep decline in that schedule in terms of the year of manufacture, it's 90%. And then your second year, it's 60, and then 40, 25, 10. So again, if people gravitate more towards used vehicles rather than new vehicles in terms of the market, you can see how your revenues are reduced. And even with lease schedules, that's the only thing that will keep us somewhat more solid than you otherwise would have been. If leases turn over, that will prevent the huge tanking of that revenue source that you may have seen 20 or so years ago. And that's why our forecast reduction isn't severe in motor vehicle excise. So my closing topic is on fall annual town meeting. Here's a page that just summarizes the fall annual town meeting warrant articles on slide 65. Again, I presented these to the Finance Committee last Thursday evening. They'll be presented to the Board of Selectmen this coming Monday evening. But just to give you an overview, basically the first 7 articles will be the consent agenda. And so they're basically de minimis articles, you know, 50,000 again for the cemetery improvements, the $11,000 of the Uber, Lyft, 10 cent per ride monies. We've got to annually, we're required to put the interest earnings on the sewer betterment account earnings into the sewer construction stabilization fund, because under state statute, unless it's explicitly provided, town meeting has to mechanically do that. So that actually takes the 335,000 out of that free cash number of the 1.7 that Darlene mentioned earlier. Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund this is just a housekeeping item where the planning board's already collected these monies. We basically now have to vote it into the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund under the bylaw. And then town meeting at a future date can decide how and when and whether to spend that money by a 2/3 vote. So that's not an expenditure, that's just a housekeeping action reflecting monies they've already collected. As I mentioned earlier, we have no collective bargaining agreements at this town meeting. We have no amendments to the current year's operating budget. So again, those first 7 items should go real quickly.
Paul?
Yes.
Just a quick question. So the number 4,
Yes.
sewer construction stabilization fund, that's required by law that we have to put that in there?
It's not required by law that we have to put it in there. It's required as part of the funding schedule for the sewer construction, the debt service for the town sewer project. When the town transferred from the property tax to in betterments towards a sewer capital charge, that funding schedule included the interest earnings on that fund. And therefore, every year now for a decade or so, we've transferred the interest earnings to keep that funding level in order to meet the debt service on the sewer. And John, I don't know if you want to touch upon that any further, but basically what he does is he calculates it. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So if everyone looks in the town operating budget, there are really 3 parts to our debt service budget. And this relates to, as the town manager said, what we call betterment funded debt. It actually, this is the interest earnings, not only in the sewer betterments, but the sewer capital improvement surcharge that we all pay. There's a $1.05 surcharge on the base sewer rate. And we collect just over 900,000 per year in those sewer capital improvement surcharges. That money gets set aside in a special fund. And so what we need to do is we need to set the interest earnings aside that we earn in those funds so that we'll have this money to pay future years' debt service. We'll be paying the debt service out through about 2031, 2032. And then after that, it will be retired.
So what's happened over time is we've transferred from paying property tax and betterment funds, have transferred over to the sewer capital fund, which was the model that the sewer commission did when they funded the final phases of the sewer project.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. I thought you had said it was required by law, but
no, what's required.
I remember seeing it every year.
Right.
When you said that tonight, I thought
No, what's required by law is that unless otherwise specified by statute, the state law is all funds earned go to the general fund of the town. So therefore, every year we do this. The only other way you could have done this would have been to have passed a special act of the legislature, which would have been a special law for Chelmsford to have taken those interest earnings and automatically credited it to the sewer stabilization fund. I guess they never thought of that or considered that. What they considered was, well, the fund will earn interest and those interest earnings will be part of the financing schedule. So for the last 10 years, because of the way the state law is written, we have to do this mechanical step because of the fact that we don't have a special act of the legislature that would basically do that for us. Okay. So anyway, that's the first set. Article 8 is a small parcel of $16,000 of conservation land that the Conservation Commission is recommending the town purchase for conservation purposes. Article 9, we spoke of earlier, the renovation expansion of the North Fire Station. Article 10 were the capital improvements that John presented earlier. And then you get into the free cash articles, the 3 there, 2 are Mr. Ragazio's citizen petition articles that he'll be presenting to the selectmen next Monday and to the finance committee this coming Thursday. Article 13 is what I spoke of
Excuse
earlier.
me, Paul.
Yes.
So if the town meeting decides they want to act on one of the two citizens petitions in Articles 11 and 12,
Yes.
then what that would do is amend on the floor Article 13.
No, it'd probably be no action on 13. If the funding source isn't available, then there'd be no action. So in other words, if Mr. Regazio had submitted two articles, one was $1 million and the other one was a sum of money.
Right.
If he has sponsored that article under Article 12 would say, I want to take the $1.3 million and provide it to reduce the property tax levy even lower than what it would be under the projection, then when it came to 13, there'd be no action because there's no funds available.
No, but if town meeting said, yeah, take another 500,000 out of free cash, then you would amend the amount in 13.
Yes, yeah, because I can't appropriate what's not there. So whatever's there, I would ask to be appropriated. And I thought it as a courtesy to let him go first and then put
Right.
Yes. Article 14 is same request from Mr. Regazio about transferring additional money from the stabilization fund to reduce the property tax levy. Once again, he had $1 million article and then a sum of money article. So whatever he acts upon there would further reduce the levy in fiscal year 2021. Article 16 is a zoning bylaw amendment for historical preservation and reuse. Again, that will be presented to the Finance Committee, I believe, this Thursday, and then the Selectmen next Monday. Article 17 is wildlife feeding. Again, I expect presentations this Thursday, and then next Monday at the Selectmen meeting. Although the Selectmen pretty much are familiar with this, so they may not spend a lot of time with that. Article 18 is a request that I put forward for funding for the sewer capacity study. That's a $150,000 request. And that would be funded by the Sewer Capital Fund, which is the $2.3 million that the town has been building for the last 2 decades towards addressing future sewer capacity needs to do the study that's been proposed by Weston and Sampson. And then Article 19 is a request to amend the general bylaw regarding connection to sewer. Yes.
Just as far as the finance committee is concerned, and I know I've talked to a couple of members, we may not have a meeting this Thursday and have it instead next Thursday, given that the presentations coming from the people we have not heard from yet, we don't expect them to last quite long. In that instance, we'd be able to go a little earlier, start a little earlier, and then have our finance committee meeting, address those articles, and proceed to vote, as opposed to having a very short meeting this Thursday and then voting the following week. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you. So if there are no further questions regarding the town meeting warrant articles, I just have some concluding remarks, 2 slides, and they probably look very familiar because these are the ones that we saw in June. Again, I'm not going to belabor them. Again, we're seeing the economic fallout from the coronavirus, which we expect to hit us at least until 21 and 22. It's impacting state and local revenues. Again, our sources of taxes we've discussed tonight from Darlene and John and myself is it's affecting our motor vehicle, meals taxes, hotel taxes, and perhaps eventually construction. And you say, well, why construction? Darlene talked about residential construction. Well, that's right. She talked about residential construction. The bulk of the construction revenues and permit fees that we saw in the last couple of years were really driven by large multifamily residential projects. And therefore, there's really nothing huge like Turnpike Road or the work on Gorham Street or the units that are being constructed on Littleton Road by Hunt Road coming before the community that will generate the building permit revenues that we saw in the last couple of years. So that's why I have construction there, because that is going to diminish that building permit number, because you start talking about 400 units and so forth, or that's not there. Yeah, you may get something in the center at Oddfellows and so forth, but no way near the magnitude of what we've seen the last couple of years. Again, the next bullet point, it is different than the 2008 recession. Again, we don't know how long and what will happen with these occupancy restrictions going into the winter months. And again, everything is changing. And then the last slide, again, just emphasizing further, it's a multi-year challenge. We see less growth in the levy during 22. Expect that diminishment over time, as I mentioned earlier. We touched upon the Middlesex County retirement assessment and the solid waste disposal cost increase in 22, and just the constant uncertainty and the idea of taking the positive variances and reserving them for future use during this multi-year period. So that concludes my remarks. Again, if anybody has any questions for me, John, Darlene, whatever, please let us know.
I don't see anything in chat, and I don't see anybody waving at us, but
Thank you all for pulling it together.
Thank you.
thanks, Darlene and John and Paul and Dr. Lang for everything you did. The last agenda item is set the next tri-board meeting, which I think you had in the presentation for January 11th.
Yeah, unless there's a feeling that this board wants to meet anytime sooner, and I guess you could call one if you want one anytime sooner. We don't know what's ahead of us, but barring the unforeseen, that would sort of make sense. Would be to convene, in another 4 months. Thank you.
All right, we just have one last item on the agenda. If anybody wants to make a motion.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Great. All in favor? We have to do it by roll call, Paul.
Can we raise our hands?
You can raise your hands. I don't think there'll be any opposition to it.
All right. Everybody have a great night. Be safe. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.